2018, a painting sold at Sotheby's for $100 million. The painting was mostly blue, a few scratchy lines, no faces, no landscape, no story you could point to and say, I understand this. Art critics called it a masterpiece. The buyer, a hedge fund manager, called it an investment. And somewhere in the auction room, a journalist leaned over to her colleague and whispered, "Is this a joke?" It wasn't. And that's the part nobody tells you. Most people look at modern art and feel one of two things: confusion or mild irritation. A banana duct taped to a wall sells for $6.2 million. A canvas painted entirely black sells for more than a luxury apartment in Manhattan. A digital file of a cartoon rock sells for $1.3 million. And every time one of these stories goes viral, the same comment appears across the internet: I could have made that. Maybe you could have. But here's what nobody explains. The art itself was never really the point. And the people buying it knew that from the beginning. To understand what's actually happening, you need to forget everything you learned about art in school. Forget beauty, forget skill, forget meaning. Because the ultra-high-end art market doesn't operate on any of those things. It operates on something much older, much simpler, and far more dangerous. But first, let's talk about a problem most people never think about. What happens when you have too much money? Imagine you are genuinely, absurdly wealthy, hundreds of millions of dollars, and you have a problem. Where do you put it? Cash loses value every year to inflation. Stocks are volatile. Real estate is traceable. Governments tax it. And in some parts of the world, a political shift can make an entire fortune disappear overnight. So, what have wealthy people across every civilization in history done when they needed to store value somewhere safe, somewhere portable, somewhere governments struggled to regulate? They bought objects: gold, jewels, and for the last century, increasingly, art. A painting doesn't depreciate like a car. It doesn't require maintenance like a yacht. It can be moved across borders. It can be stored in a climate-controlled facility in Geneva, technically outside the jurisdiction of any country, inside what experts call a freeport. And most importantly, its value is whatever the market says it is. There's no earnings report, no quarterly review. A painting is worth exactly what the next buyer is willing to pay. That makes it one of the most flexible stores of value ever invented. And now you understand something important. The most expensive art in the world isn't competing with other art. It's competing with gold bars and offshore accounts. But that still doesn't explain why the ugly art is specifically the art that costs the most money. That's where it gets interesting. Here's a question. If you wanted to hide value inside an object, would you choose something with an obvious agreed-upon value, or something whose value is entirely constructed by opinion? Think carefully. An obvious value is actually a limitation. If everyone agrees a painting is worth $5 million, then arguments stop there. But if a painting's value is entirely a matter of artistic consensus, of who the artist is, which critics endorse it, which museums display it, which collectors buy it, then value becomes almost infinitely flexible. It can be inflated, it can be justified, it can be negotiated upward with almost no ceiling. This is why abstraction became the language of ultra-high-end art. Not because the ultra-wealthy are mysterious geniuses who see things regular people cannot, but because art that's difficult to evaluate is art that's easy to reprice. And art that's easy to reprice is money that's easy to move. In 1982, a 21-year-old graffiti artist from Brooklyn was sleeping on friends' couches and selling hand-painted postcards on the street for a few dollars each. His name was Jean-Michel Basquiat. His paintings were raw, aggressive, chaotic, words crossed out. Figures that looked like they'd been drawn by someone furious at the world. Most people walking past his work kept walking, but a small group of Manhattan art dealers saw something different. Not just the paintings, the story. A self-taught outsider, working in a world that actively excluded him. The paintings weren't just objects, they were a historically significant narrative. And narratives, it turned out, were even more valuable than beauty. By 1985, Basquiat was on the cover of the New York Times magazine. By 1988, he was dead at 27. In 2017, a single Basquiat painting sold for $110.5 million, more than any Picasso sold that year. A graffiti artist from Brooklyn, whose work most people still couldn't explain, had produced one of the most expensive objects on Earth. The painting hadn't changed. The story around it had. This is the machinery underneath the art market that nobody puts in the brochure. Value in ultra-high-end art is not discovered. It's manufactured, deliberately, by a small network of galleries, auction houses, critics, and collectors who all benefit when prices go up. Here's exactly how it works. A gallery takes on a young artist. They control how much work reaches the market, keeping supply extremely low. They place paintings strategically in the right collections. They get the work into the right museum shows. And then, when the moment is right, they send one piece to auction. The result becomes the official price for everything that artist ever made. Suddenly, a painter selling work for $5,000 2 years ago now has a market at $500,000. None of this is secret. The dealers will tell you directly, managing supply is just good business. Creating narrative is just good curation. But the effect is something closer to engineering a market from nothing. The art world doesn't discover great artists, it constructs them. And here's where it gets darker. For decades, buying and selling art was one of the only major financial transactions in America requiring almost no disclosure of who was actually involved. A buyer could be anonymous. A seller could be anonymous. A transaction worth tens of millions could pass through a shell company with no public record of the actual humans behind it. In 2020, the US government finally noticed. The Anti-Money Laundering Act was updated specifically to target the art market. Because for a long time, the art world had been one of the last great financial shadows, and some of the money flowing through it was not looking for a beautiful painting, it was looking for an exit. Now here's the part that surprises most people when they learn it. Not all of it was laundering, not even most of it. Some of the biggest returns in art history came from people who simply understood something early that the rest of the world was slow to see. The collectors who bought Basquiat in 1982 for $5,000 didn't know they were buying something worth $110 million. They were buying a story they believed in before the world caught up. That gap between current perception and future consensus, that is where the real money in the art market actually lives. And the asset they were holding was singular. One painting, only one. A stock can be diluted, new shares can be issued. A painting cannot be diluted. And if the narrative keeps growing, if the story becomes culturally embedded, then the number of people competing for that single object can grow forever. But the supply stays the same. Scarcity, narrative, time. That's the entire formula. There is one more layer to this. The thing I mentioned at the beginning. The silence. Art is the only financial asset you can enjoy while you hold it. A gold bar in a vault gives you nothing while you wait. But a painting on your wall generates something no spreadsheet can measure. Status, social signal. The quiet communication to every person who enters your home that you understand something they don't. For a certain class of buyer, that signal is worth an enormous premium on its own, which is why the art market has survived every financial crash for a century. Even when the economy collapses, the ultra-wealthy still need somewhere to put money that also makes them look like they're above worrying about money. Tonight, somewhere outside Geneva, thousands of paintings sit in crates that have never been seen publicly. They are not art. They are money that learned how to hang on a wall. And somewhere else, a 23-year-old is making the next one.